Good afternoon, everyone. Let me welcome you. My name is Alan Altman. My wife, Judy, is here, and she's thrilled that this event is taking place because it'll be over in 4 hours. We want to welcome you all to the Aspen Chabad Jewish Community Center. It is truly a community center. We have all sorts of events here. We even have the Aspen bicycling class downstairs from the Aspen Club. We hope that'll be reinstituted at some near point in the future. But nonetheless, Rabbi Mintz is not here. He has decided to take a vacation this week, which was planned quite a long time ago. But he asked me to send you his best wishes and thank you for coming to this program. I am a person, a physician, who has lectured around the world for probably the past 25 to 30 years. And before I speak at these lectures, I don't get nervous anymore. Today, as I am not speaking, I am extremely nervous. You are in for an incredible treat, both mentally, spiritually. These 5 people are incredible. I have spent the past 2 days getting to know them better, and I'm very proud of this program. I am extremely proud of the city of Aspen's citizens and visitors for coming out for this. I am a little ashamed, however. I'm a little ashamed of the Aspen Times. I am a little ashamed of the Aspen Daily News. I am a little ashamed of the Aspen Institute. All of these organizations should be thrilled having the level of people we have brought in from international destinations to speak here on such an important topic. The Institute, when asked if they would co-sponsor at no cost to them, said no. And the newspapers, other than the $10,000 we've paid in advertising, have written no story on this. You go and tell me why. Tell me why the bicycle event is more important than having these 5 luminaries who are trying to help the world. So that's what I'm ashamed of, and I am sorry to bring that up, but it's important that you all know it. Someone once asked me during the summer, how do we pay for these events? I mean, you must charge a lot for a ticket. Well, today we did charge for a ticket. We charged something that we wouldn't have to pay change for, so it made it easy. But there are a number of people who have helped with the events this summer, and specifically this one, and I don't want to finish without naming them. Jack Reinberg, the Canadian Coalition Against Terror, Joe Lipsy, Steve Gorlin, Larry Winterman, Aaron Fleck, and I even have promises from 2 gentlemen that just in case we go over and we need something, so I thank John Preston and Peter Gerhard as well. And also something called the Altman Family Foundation. Thank you. We have 5 international speakers. They are incredibly smart, personable. And what I want to tell you is that we are going to hear from first our moderator, then we'll hear from 2 of the speakers. We will have a break. There will be goodies outside. We will then come back in, have the final 2 speakers, and then we will put all 5 of them up here. This will be questions and answers, but specific topics as well. And it won't be a question for Dr. Jasser or Professor Mansur. It'll be for the entire group, and there will be discussion. And I can tell you, after having had dinner with them last night, and he knows about it, because he's here because he overheard the discussion, it will be lively. And I'm so excited. So, you will hear about each speaker before they are invited up to the podium from our moderator. Our moderator is Raheel Raza. This event could not have happened without her. Last year, she spoke right over there after a showing of a movie called My Brother's Keeper. What is it? Safekeepers. Faith Keepers. I told you I was nervous. It was a movie, Faith Keepers, produced by the Clarion organization. And Raheel spoke. And after she spoke, I sat down with her and I said, what can we do together? And this is what happened. And I must eternally thank her for bringing in these incredible people from all parts of the world, sincerely, with incredible gratitude. Thank you, Raheel. Raheel Raza is president of the Council for Muslims Facing Tomorrow, founding member of the Muslim Reform Movement. She's director of Forum for Learning and an award-winning journalist, and she's also author of Their Jihad, Not My Jihad, and many other publications. Before I ask her to come up here, I just want to show you a video clip that she is in that can really help understand as an excellent introduction to this program. Let's show that first clip, please.
With each new terrorist attack, the debate over the true nature of Islam intensifies.
Let's be clear, though. Islam is not our adversary.
This is a civilizational struggle between the values of freedom and liberty and radical Islamic terror.
Those on the left defend Islam, calling it a religion of peace.
Muslims are peaceful and tolerant people and have nothing whatsoever to do with terrorism.
Those on the right want to stop the flow of Muslims to the U.S., concerned about jihadists sneaking in among masses of refugees.
What happened in Paris could happen here. There is no middle ground.
But experts say there's also a much bigger debate.
When there is a disease or a virus, it can't be treated unless you identify the problem. So we have to call it what it is, and it is violent, radical, extremist Islamism.
For over 20 years, Raheel Raza, a Sunni Muslim, has dedicated her life to speaking out against what she calls the rising threat of radical Islam.
This is not an easy topic to discuss.
In her latest project, By the Numbers, The Untold Story of Muslim Opinions and Demographics, Raza warns that Islam presents a great threat.
In light of the fact that most of the terrorism in the world today involves Muslims in one way or another, and because it directly affects our lives and security, I think that we need to be able to have an open, honest, and fact-based conversation about that.
Produced by the Clarion Project, Raza describes so-called spheres of radicalization. At the core is what she calls violent jihadists like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, and Boko Haram.
These are the jihadists who murder people in San Bernardino, Texas, Paris, London, Delhi, Jerusalem, Ottawa, Madrid, Nairobi.
A second sphere, Raza says, are those who support jihadist goals but not their methods. For example, while they push for an Islamic takeover, they do so through democratic methods.
Islamists want many of the same things as the jihadists, it's just that their tactics differ.
She points to the large percentage of Egyptians who supported the Muslim Brotherhood or the Palestinians who voted to give political power to the terrorist group Hamas.
So instead of engaging in terror themselves, they use the political and cultural system to further their aims.
The third sphere, and the largest of them all, is what Raza also calls the most disturbing, the fundamentalists.
The Muslims in this circle are certainly not like ISIS, and they're not working to overthrow governments like the Muslim Brotherhood. But they do hold beliefs and practices that no doubt will seem radical to you and me.
She points to an exhaustive Pew Research project in 2013 that interviewed thousands of Muslims across 39 countries. In the survey, large numbers of Muslims, representing millions of people, thought it was justifiable to execute people who converted away from Islam and to murder women who dishonor the family.
These studies paint a picture of an Islamic world that is increasingly out of step with the modern world.
In the same survey, alarming numbers of young Muslims in Western countries also supported suicide bombings.
42% of French Muslims, 35% of British Muslims, and 26% of American Muslims believe suicide bombings against non-Muslims can be justified.
And equally shocking, Raza adds, is the large percentage of Muslims who want Sharia law, which calls for stoning of adulterers and chopping off thieves' hands, to be the law of the land.
Of course, not every Muslim believes in these things, but hundreds of millions do. The numbers are right here for all to see.
Raza says if radical Islam is ever to be defeated, an honest conversation must happen about one of the most important issues of our time.
By silencing the debate about radical Islamist beliefs, we abandon our own core beliefs of truth, free speech, and tolerance, and we abandon human rights in favor of political correctness.
Raza says the documentary is meant to start that conversation. George Thomas, CBN News.
Welcome to the conversation. It's what? It's Christian Broadcasting Network. Okay. Now, as I bring Raheel up, I want to make sure you understand these 5 wonderful people are Muslims. They are real Muslims, okay? Real, live Muslims. They practice. They understand the Quran. They are incredibly important in the beginnings of this reform movement. Welcome with me, please, Raheel Raza.
Thank you, Alan. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank the JCC, CCAT, everyone who has contributed, and of course, especially Dr. Alan Altman for hosting this really important event. What he forgot to tell you was that my husband declared yesterday he's moving to Aspen. So, so today is a unique opportunity to have 5 reformist Muslims together addressing issues that face us as a global threat. A radical Islamist ideology is threatening world peace, and we're here to speak to this head-on with no political correctness. Through the course of this evening, you will hear terms like jihad, Sharia, infidel, Islamist, Hadith, Sunnah, Taqiyya, and others that have been floating around with various definitions. Our hope is to help you better understand the real meaning of these terms. As Alan clarified, each one of us is an observant Muslim, and we are working for change from within the faith. Islam is a faith, like Judaism and Christianity. Islamism, on the other hand, is a theopolitical ideology and uses faith as a tool to further its subversive agenda, and this is what we are here to tackle. I would be amiss if I didn't mention that each one of us here today does this work at great peril to our personal lives, with death threats, fatwas, hostility, hate mail, and danger to our families as well. So it's important that you know what we go through to speak out the way we are doing. Now, we come from different backgrounds. We have our own organizations, but we come together on the key issue that radical Islam is the problem, moderate Islam is the solution. I should also mention that Islamic reform is different from reform in the Jewish faith. What we wish to reform is the way in which Muslims interpret and implement Islam and the Quran in their daily lives. Each one of the speakers is an expert in their field, and this is how the evening will progress. Each speaker will present for about 20 minutes, after which you'll have a chance to ask 1 or 2 questions. And at the end of the individual presentations, you will have 1 hour for panel discussion and questions and answers. So if there is a pounding question in your mind that has not been answered, please hold on to the thought and we will address it at the end of the individual presentations. After all, today is about everything you ever wanted to know about Islam but were too afraid to ask. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the first speaker. Dr. Tawfik Hamid, also known as Tariq Hamid, is an Islamic thinker, reformer, and one-time Islamic extremist from Egypt who was a member of the radical Islamist organization Jamia Islamiyya with Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, who later became the second in command for Al-Qaeda. He has a fantastic book which is out here. He's brought copies. It's called Inside Jihad: How Radical Islam Works, Why It Should Terrify Us, and How to Defeat It. I need not say more. The rest of it is up to Dr. Tawfik Hamid. A big welcome to Tawfik.
So much. Thank you so much, my dear. Thank you so much for having me with you today. Just want to make sure that everyone in the back chairs can hear me clearly, okay? Sure, just want to check on this. It's a real pleasure and honor to be with all of you today. I know the topic is not an easy one. I know it's complex, it's sensitive, but I believe at the end, the truth will, and as discussing anything in an honest and scientific way can bring unity between people. Let me start my talk today with a real story that happened between me and my wife. Her name is Manea. She's sending you her best regards. She's not here today, but sending her best regards to you. I remember very well that day when President Obama was speaking, and the message was that America, or the US, has become a beacon for liberty and democracy because it was tolerant. And Manea, my wife, was in the kitchen that day. She is a doctor, pediatrician, and she came moving toward me, and she said, "That's wrong." I said to her, "Why? What's wrong with that?" She said, "We became beacon for liberty and democracy, not because we were tolerant, but because we were intolerant." I said to her, "Oh, how come this can happen?" She said to me, "Had we been tolerant of slavery, slavery would exist today. Had we been tolerant of discrimination against women, discrimination against women would have existed at a much bigger scale today. Had we been tolerant for anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism would have been much higher even today. So the reason why today we are enjoying that level of liberty and democracy is not because we were tolerant, but because we were intolerant. We were intolerant to evil. And when I speak about evil, I remember yesterday in a lovely discussion with Dr. Altman, and it will be presented soon on the internet. He told me, "Tawfik, some people may think or say you are an Islamophobe. How would you answer them?" I said to him, "Elham, let me be very clear with you. My mission and target of life is to stand against certain violent principles. It has nothing to do with the title of a religion or so. I am against killing apostates. I'm simply for freedom of religion. Is there anything wrong with that? I want to stop discrimination against women and violence against them in the Muslim world. I want to stop slavery that's happening in ISIS and justified by Sharia laws. I want to fight anti-Semitism that calls Jews pigs and monkeys by leading Islamic scholars. I want to stop the concept of violent jihad, to declare war on non-Muslims, to subjugate them to our belief system. I want to protect gay rights so that they are no longer killed in Sharia-controlled societies. And I said to Alan, if people or some people will call me an Islamophobe because I'm standing against this evil, then it is a badge of honor on my chest to be called an Islamophobe. Thank you. Now, let me just start with some few circles again to you, because I noticed in the videos that was presented earlier, there was two opposing views. Some view was saying Muslims are bad and Islam is all evil. Some others are saying there is no problem at all. Everything is fine. And I believe both are wrong. Both are wrong. Let me explain to you why both are wrong. You should ask me. I look and I see, and this is how I present it in my lectures, always the Muslim culture as 5 circles. You know these bullseye circles, you call it that way? Yeah. The outer circle, because I did it that way because I felt it's unfair to put all Muslims in one category. It's unfair to say all Muslims are terrorists. It's also unfair to say that there is no problem at all. So let us see things in a more scientific way. So I see the outer circle, what I call culture Muslims, who are people who can just know limited things about the religion, not much deep in theology. They celebrate the Ramadan, Eid, which is like the Christmas or Hanukkah for Muslims, some celebration, and this is what they know about religion. They will born as Muslims, Muhammad or Fatima, and they will die with this name, and that's it. They are wonderful people, wonderful. They can fit typically with the modernity, the diversity that we would love to enjoy. And the inner group, the one underneath it, is what I call ritual Muslims, who people who wants to just to pray, do the fasting, and they don't want Sharia laws. They don't want to see stoning of women to death or putting people on the cross or beheadings in the streets. They don't want to see these things, and they are equally fine. Then you have a third group, the inner group are the theological Muslims, who believe in Sharia. They want to implement Sharia laws, so simply they want to see every country under the control of Taliban-like system. But they don't use violence, this group, the theological group. So they look nice. And they are fine as long as their number is below certain threshold. Once the number hits specific threshold in any society, you will start to see the real troubles coming. The fourth group are what I call the inner one. You know, now we have 3 circles. The inner one are the radicals who want to use violence and force to implement their belief system upon you and me. You should dress like this. You should not drink alcohol. You should do this and that by violence. You use violence. And then the innermost groups, they are very small in number, but they can cause serious damage, especially with the advances in technology. After 10 years, a small group of people can cause significant damage to the world via a biological weapon, for example, that can spread serious diseases among the world. So this small group are jihadists. They are very small in number, but with technology and abilities, you see September 11, you have, for example, 15 hijackers doing all these disasters. So we have 5 groups. And to illustrate it, I like to give an example. Imagine if we invited tonight someone called Muhammad or Fatima. And Muhammad or Fatima came, celebrated everything, danced, had some wine, and enjoyed everything like us. Okay, that's fine, perfect. This is a typical first level of Muslim, which is the culture Muslim. If Muhammad or Fatima said, excuse me for 5 minutes, I will just go to pray and come back to enjoy everything. Perfect, that is ritual Muslim. They are interested in doing the prayer. If Muhammad said to us, how come you invite me to a place where there is wine? I don't like to sit in a place where wine is served. And he left with anger, looking to us with anger. This is typical, the theological Muslim. If Muhammad took the bottle of wine that we had and broke it in front of us, he is a radical Muslim. He used violence. If Muhammad exploded the whole area, then I don't need to tell you who is Muhammad. He was the jihadist, okay? Now, let me just move briefly to some slides, just to show you that the solution is simple, is simply not by presenting a way of reform. When I say or theological reform, this is the first modern interpretation or commentary for the Quran in history. I wrote this book, and I authored it. And I remember when I was in Aspen here 9 years ago or 8 years ago, I promised I will do this work. And finally, it is available in Arabic language, commentary for the Quran. In brief, if I read this when I was young, I wouldn't have been radicalized because it explains the verses in a different way. I hope it's translated one day to other languages, but that is the beginning, or at least part of the beginning. Thank you. It's called Ruh al-Quran, or the spirit of the Quran, because I try to take people beyond the literalism to the spirit of the meaning of the words, rather than just simply going literary, because that can be very destructive. And I remember, here it's fair just to remember people who contributed. My wife, she's the one who typed it, okay? I was dictating, and she doesn't know how to use, I know, but she doesn't know how to use both hands. So believe me, wallah, she used one finger to type 250,000 letters. That's here, okay? So it's fair to remember people who contributed, not only myself. Now, let me just touch on some strategic approach to the problem, because we can't just simply say it's putting this will solve the problem. That is part of the solution. But if you really want a real solution, you have to think strategically. You have people who are pre-radicals, and people who are radicals, and people who are terrorists. So if you are dealing with people at the first level, this pre-radical level, they need theological reform. I will give an example. They need what I call radical thinking modification, changing the thinking traits that leads to terrorism. And the last one is what I call shaking the foundations strategy. The second group, who are the radical group, trying to reform the radical group via giving them alternative can be very slow. From my personal experience as a former radical, the best way to go is effective, and that's important, the word effective, psychological warfare operations to deter them, and this is possible via the internet. A lot of things now are possible via the internet. So to send them messages that what they are doing is producing the opposite of what they want to achieve. So if they want to raise the banner in the name of Islam, what they are doing actually is bringing more insults to Islam and more insults to the Prophet. So you try to use certain approaches to link their actions to the negative consequences that's happening in the Muslim world. Then you have the terrorists that need militant approaches to a great extent. When it comes to strategy here, I will give examples on a verse. For example, this is at the first level, the theological reform. When I was young, I remember very well, I was reading in the Quran a verse that said, فَاقْتُلُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ حَيْثُ وَجَدْتُمُوهُم. Kill the infidels wherever you find them. And I just couldn't take it. It was against my human conscience. So I asked a friend of mine, his name was Adil Saif. He was a Salafi, radical, and he said to me, of course, we have to fight all these unbelievers and the aim of jihad, and he brought me books for Abu al-A'la al-Mawdudi and all this stuff. I was not satisfied. I went to a Sufi scholar in a close-by mosque near us. His name was Sheikh Shaban. I remember him very well. And he was an old man. I sat in front of him after the Friday prayer, and I said to him, look, Sheikh Shaban, I read this verse, kill the infidels wherever you find them, and I don't know what to do with it. Shall I implement it? What can I do? And Sheikh Shaban was very kind. He was a Sufi. You know, the Sufism is sort of, mystical form of understanding of the religion. He pat me on my shoulder. This shoulder I remember well, not that one. And he said to me, my son, just love every human being and be good with every human being, and God will be happy with you. I was impressed. Then I said to him, but Sheikh Shaban, it is written in the Quran. It's written here. He said to me, يَوْمَ يَأْتِي تَأْوِيلُهُ, which is a part of a verse in the Quran that means only in the day of judgment you will be able to understand the full meaning of the Quran, not now. And I have to be honest with you. I was young, enthusiastic, and I was not ready to wait for the day of judgment to understand. So I followed Adil Saif, the radical, with the literal understanding that we have to fight the non-Muslims. Later on, in this Quran commentary, and I gave this verse here, and I took it at 5 levels of interpretations. And as a matter of honesty, I learned the concept of taking things at different levels from a Jewish rabbi that sat beside me in an airplane, and we had a talk, and he explained to me how things can be taken at different level of understanding. His name was Rabbi Moshe from Canada, remember him? And it happened, our tickets were beside one another. Just imagine the situation, okay? And I implemented it, and I took it with the Quran, so I put it at 5 levels here. The first level was, who are those infidels? Is it any infidel or a specific group? And the answer is a specific group. The second level of interpretation, on which basis you put your assumption that they are a specific group of people, not to everyone, on the fact that the verse uses the suffix the or el before the word, which simply means defining article. Like if I told you I'm going tomorrow to a White House, what does it mean? But if I said I'm going to the White House, that makes a huge difference. So the suffix the, if we put this in consideration, it's not almost all the verses that's used by the radicals to promote violence can be limited in time and the place to specific people, not to be generalized. Can you imagine this? The third level of interpretation, why God was unhappy with those infidels, because according to the Quranic verses themselves, they discriminated, they kicked the early believers out of their homes, they tortured them, they burned them alive. So what is the common theme of this is to discriminate against small religious minority because of their faith. Then level 5 interpretation, what can we learn today from this? Is not to discriminate against small religious minorities. Otherwise, we will be exactly like those infidels. So the verse now, if a young Muslim was reading it literally, it can have a meaning that go and kill every non-Muslim. If someone learned it from this, he will understand, no, that was limited, and my role today is not to discriminate against more religious minorities. Otherwise, I will be exactly like those infidels. The second point here is the change in the thinking process. Because you can have the religious text with one person, and he can become a radical. The same text with another person, he is not. How this can be explained? The process of thinking that leads to radicalism. I tried to fight it using cognitive psychology. And I have a degree in cognitive psychology. In addition to medicine, I developed a model called the multidimensional learning model, which was the first model in history to integrate cognitive psychology in education. So I try to use these approaches to bring a way of changing the thinking process, complete program for it, of people and individuals to stop the radicalization process. And I put, for example, absolutism, judgmentalism, literalism. There are certain ways of thinking for the radicals. So, for example, the absolutism, I show in the teaching a photo like this, and the next one is a person from the other side seeing the opposite. And I start to put certain questions to them to make them feel that the same photo, the same image can be seen from different angle in a completely different way. So before judging me that I am wrong, I must be absolutely correct. If I have a photo from here and you have a photo from there, you have a photo from here, you are a photo, we will have 4 different photos. So we are different, but does this mean you are wrong or I am wrong? No. All of us could be correct. In fact, if we came together, put our different views together, we will be able to see the room in a better way. So I have a complete separate program from the theological one, completely separate, using just thinking process to change the radicalism. And then checking the foundation strategy is to make them question the authenticity of some extra Quranic sources for Islam that they use to create radical views. Like, for example, killing apostates is not in the Quran. Stoning a woman to death is not in the Quran, but in these resources, extra Quranic resources. So creating doubt and questioning such resources for them can weaken these intense radical views and ideas. The fourth point is to give them negative deterrent. Remember in World War II, why the Nazi Germany surrendered at the end? Why the Emperor of Japan surrendered? Because they are afraid of death. So death was a deterrent. But for the radical Islamists and jihadists, no, they want to die actually. So there are other ways. I will not be able to reveal anything here, to be honest with you, but I reassure you, there are ways to deter them from attacking us, psychological ways that can use the internet and spread certain things that can deter them from doing further attacks on us. The last one is encouraging art and the music. If you see any radical group all over the world, I mean Islamic group, the first thing they do is to suppress beauty. Women are all in black, no music, no art. I'm talking about Taliban and Al-Qaeda, not every Islamic country. I'm talking about the radical groups, ISIS. So you see everything black, no music, no art, nothing. And I lived this experience. I stopped listening to music when I was young, when I started to become radical. And I'll tell you what does it do exactly. Do you know what happened when you stop people from enjoying art and the music? After some time, I lost the ability to appreciate beauty. This was simply like damaging my taste receptors of the tongue. If you damage them and I'm no longer able to appreciate difference in taste, what's beautiful and what's ugly, you can put in my mouth anything, mud, and I will eat it because I can't distinguish. The same with the brain. When I lost my ability to distinguish between the ugliness and the beauty in general in life, the colors, the beauty, the music, the art, it became so easy for them to fill my brain with mud, with anything. And that is another fundamental component. When I teach this, people get surprised. How come I talk about terrorism and I talk about art and music? Believe me, that is part of the story. And finally, yes, I took you through some strategic concepts now. But let me forget about this for a couple of minutes and just speak with you from my heart, okay? Because I had a promise. I gave a promise years ago, and I just want to fulfill it. The promise was for the first person who was beheaded by Al-Qaeda in the history of radical Islam. And he was a Jew. His name was Daniel Pearl. They invited him to dinner. They betrayed him. they beheaded Daniel. And the last thing he said to them, I will never forget this. Yes, I was a Jew. I am a Jew. I couldn't really comprehend what happened when I saw the smile of this young man. He has such a beautiful smile that's full of hope to humanity. And I couldn't sleep, believe me. We were in New Zealand. I went off the sleep or the bed because I couldn't sleep. I went to the kitchen where there was a table. There I took some pieces of paper and I started writing some words for the spirit and the soul of Daniel Pearl. Let me share them with you. And I will say them in Arabic first, and I will translate them to English, okay? And then that will be the end. I said to him, to Daniel, أقسم أني لن أترك اسمك يمحى من ذاكرة التاريخ. I swear that I will never ever let your name be erased from the memory of history. وسأكتب اسمك بالدمع. And I will write your name with my tears. وسأحفر اسمك في الصخر. And I will carve your name at the top of the mountains so that everybody will see it. فما قتلوك وحدك يا دانيال. They haven't only killed you, O Daniel. بل قتلوا الحق وقتلوا الحب وقتلوا أحلام الأجيال. But they killed the meaning of love, the meaning of the truth, and the dreams of the coming generations. قسما بأنينك وقت الذبح. I swear with your groaning pains when they slaughtered you. وبدمع طفلك في الرحم. And I swear with the tears of your baby when it was still in the womb. أني لن أنساك يا دانيال. That I will never ever forget you, O Daniel. إن قتلوك لأنك يهودي فأنا يهودي منذ الآن. Then I am a Jew from now on. Thank you so much. God bless you all. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I think we all need to take a deep breath. That was profound. And it just gave you a taste of what is going to come ahead of you. As I had promised you, this is all from the heart. None of this is scripted as such, or none of this is something that we don't do because we care for the cause, and that's why we do it. I want to also take a second to mention something that is very unusual in this gathering of 5 people today, is the diversity. You have here Muslims from Yemen, from Egypt, from Syria, from Bangladesh, and from Pakistan. And it wasn't planned this way, it just happened by coincidence. So I'm really delighted and honored to invite the next speaker, who is a Yemeni Swiss national. She is a mentor and someone that I admire greatly, specifically for her work on women's rights. But of course, that shows you where my leaning is. But she's a political scientist, specialized on the Arab Middle East, a writer, human rights activist. She's well known for her writing on humanist Islam and fight against extremism. Her book that is really worth reading is called Women and Sharia Law, The Impact of Legal Pluralism in UK, which has actually brought about changes in the legal system in the UK just 2 weeks ago. And she has a manuscript about nonviolence extremism called Islam Mainstream, which is ready to be published. It's great, with great pleasure, that I invite Dr. Elham Manea.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to be among you. And I will basically right now read from a script, and I hope afterwards we can discuss. It's part of my work on nonviolent Islamism. There is a pink elephant in the room. We all see the elephant standing right there in the middle of the room. Huge, outrageous, bright pink. But we are afraid to say it. There is a pink elephant in the room. Instead, we insist. The room is empty. Empty is easy, empty is reassuring, empty is not complex. Empty is just empty. The fact is, we are dealing with nothing other than a radicalized, politicized form of Islam. That is the elephant in the room. And that is the core of the problem. And it is a problem that concerns us all around the world. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say it is the global challenge of the 21st century. There is no us and them here. We are all in this together. We can spend all we want, hundreds of millions, on anti-terrorism programs. But unless we acknowledge this simple fact in our policy measures, we may as well shred these millions and throw them into a river, wasted. What matters is ideology, and my colleagues have been saying that from the very beginning. And the ideology mainstreamed through a systematic process and spread through structures flush with resources is based on a radicalized, politicized form of Islam. And yes, I do believe that Islam is what we humans make of it. Any religion can be made into a message of love or a sword of hatred, depending on the people who believe it. And yes, there is a peaceful reading of Islam, and many people, millions and millions, hundreds of millions, follow it. But the fact remains that the actions and atrocities committed by ISIS in Iraq and Syria were ideologically mainstreamed long ago. In mosques that curse Christians, Jews, and unbelievers in every Friday sermon. And they were mainstreamed by religious figures and preachers who greet us every day through satellite TV programs, preaching a message of hatred and intolerance against the other, regardless of what this other is. They were mainstreamed in schools and Quran schools that teach us that the penalty for converting from Islam is death, that we should stay away from the unbelievers, that Christians and Jews are protected people who should pay a tax to be left alone or else face war and slavery. In other words, they do not comply, their children, their possessions would be legitimate spoils of war and targets of looting. We learned that in our schools and Quran lessons. The fate of members of other religions is left untold, but we can read it between the lines. In these classes, we were never taught that a citizen has the right to choose his or her religion, or that a citizen is equal before the law, regardless of religion or beliefs. Little wonder that we see the face of this extremism clearly manifested today and the girls still kidnapped and sold by Boko Haram in Nigeria, in the faces of Yazidi women still held slaves by ISIS. We forget that there are still many. And the members of the diverse Iraqi and Syrian minority groups fleeing for their lives because of an ideology that treats them as subhuman and inferior on account of their religious affiliation. We see its face in laws in Islamic countries that violate citizen rights and human rights with impunity and uphold religious beliefs by force. We see it spreading like cancer in failed state all over the MENA region and South Asian countries. And we see its face in the close communities in European and North American society and the radicalization of young men and women within these society, turning them against their new homelands. We see it in the way it is changing our societies globally, wherever it gains a foothold. ISIS is the product of a religious discourse, a mainstream discourse. Ignoring the problem will not do, not any longer. We have to act, we have to call the problem by its name and tackle it by whatever measures necessary. It is we, people everywhere, who are paying a high price for the inaction in dealing with this extremism. We are all in this together, like it or not. I'm sure you are aware that the majority of victims of violent Islamic extremism live in Islamic countries. They live in Islamic countries. 5 countries, Iraq, Afghanistan, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Syria, accounted for 72% of all deaths from terrorism in 2016. Iraq and Nigeria alone had around 12,000 deaths caused by terrorist attacks. Their death should remind us that this violent extremism, and most importantly, its ideological and religious roots, must be our concern. All of us. Again, I repeat, there are no we and they here. We are all in this together, regardless of our faith, regardless of our color or nationality. This is a global threat, and we have to address it together. I told you that the ideology of Islamism is the core of the matter. I added that what concerns me is not the violent form Islamism, it's non-violent form. Perhaps it's time to explain what I mean. I see Islamism as a spectrum, and its violent form lies at the further extreme. Young men don't just wake up in the morning and decide to blow themselves up and commit atrocities. They have been indoctrinated in a process that socializes them into a worldview and a narrative of victimhood that convinces them that what they are doing is an act of defense, a legitimate act. Not all of those affected by this ideology commit terrorist acts. Only a small percentage acts on it. My argument here is focusing on the violence alone is not enough. Our first priority should be its ideological and religious roots, and those who promote this form. The ideology has 2 components, political and religious. That is why I said religion is also part of the problem. Nonviolent Islamism is not just a totalitarian political ideology that seeks domination. It's also the religious interpretation that legitimizes this domination and sanctions its action. Consider this example. When ISIS started to take Yazidi women and sell them in slave markets, it was interesting to see how many prominent religious figures in Egypt and Saudi Arabia were silent on the issue. Of course, you had those who clearly said that slavery is an ancient practice and cannot be revived as Islamic. But Al-Azhar, located in Cairo, Egypt, perceived as the highest Sunni authority and long infiltrated by the Saudi Arabian Wahhabi Salafi reading of Islam, did not issue a clear condemnation of this action by ISIS. It condemned its violence strongly, said ISIS did not represent Islam as usual, didn't condemn its practice of taking women as slaves. It did not. Why? The reason is simple. From Al-Azhar's perspective, taking women as sex slaves during a war can be accepted when the circumstances are right. It does have to be, from this theological perspective, a legitimate war. And this position was clearly articulated by one of Al-Azhar leading female scholars, Professor Su'ad Saleh. I had the pleasure of debating her once. On a TV program, she said that Muslims who capture women in a legitimate war against their enemies may own them and have sex with them as slave girls in order to humiliate them. The enemy she referred to in her talk was Israel. Now, the timing of that fatwa, which is a religious edict during a time when ISIS was taking Yazidi women as slave women, raised eyebrows in Egypt. Similarly, when some Saudi intellectuals called for a clear fatwa prohibiting slavery, they got a swift reaction from the main Saudi sheikhs. These are religious scholars. Many hurried to use the word of a well-known religious sheikh, Salih al-Fawzan, a well-known member of the Saudi Council of Senior Religious Scholars. Years ago, he was recorded as saying that Islam did not forbid taking women as slaves, and that those who are calling for the prohibition of slavery are ignorant, unbelievers, or atheists. And that this is God's rule, end of quote. You should know that Al-Fawzan wrote the religious curriculum that is used today for Saudi children. He publicly said that taking slaves is part of jihad, what he considered Islamic holy war. Now, if you think what he says has nothing to do with you here in North American and European societies, think again, because his books and fatwas are being taught and promoted in Saudi-funded schools, mosques, and madrasas. So ISIS was not acting out of a script written by aliens when it decided to take women and children as slaves. Its action have been mainstreamed by a fundamentalist interpretation of Islam, and that interpretation is based on religious scripts and religious history. Nonviolent Islamism propagates an ideology of political Islam and a radical interpretation of religion. It has different forms. It's far from being homogeneous. But at its core, it divides the world into two camps, believers and unbelievers. The believers should raise the banner of Islam and spread it, if not by violence, than by da'wah, that is religious preaching. According to this view, Islam is not merely a religion. It's both state and religion. And religious laws should be applied, and those who deviate from this religion and its laws should be harshly punished. God, accordingly, is the ruler. It insists that Islam is destined to rule over the world and that jihad, holy war, is the tool to achieve this goal. You have to read their books to understand what I'm saying here, because I didn't invent this. There are times to use violence, of course. However, the concept of jihad is not disputed at all. And people are divided into categories and treated accordingly. Those who believe enjoy the rights, those of other religious beliefs or different Islamic denominations will suffer. In all its preaching and work, the discourse of victimhood is a key message that shapes all its narration of history and current affairs. Islam is being attacked, and Muslims are a persecuted group. And the problem is, it's not just an ideology there. You have structures, money, abundance of resources that seem to promote this reading and form of religious interpretation. I mean, if you may not believe this, but this form of Islam was considered fringe in the beginning of the 20th century. Today, thanks to Gulf money, they're not. It's not. A complex web of organizations and movements actively promote this type of Islamism. They control mosques, schools, madrasa, charities, and social work and financial institutions. I just want to show you some slides. They're not really fancy when it comes to how I present them, but I would like you to see how the curriculum of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is considered by some Western policymakers moderate, what they teach the children, in order for you to understand why I call them our far-right groups. Okay, so how do I use this? The green one? Okay. So if you look at the Muslim Brothers curriculum, it's divided according to the age and life stage of the members. They teach different topics, the Quran, the sayings of Muhammad, jurisprudence, that is Islamic law, the seerah, the life of Muhammad, and beliefs through various activities and songs. Children learn from 6 volumes of a book called Ar-Rashad for Cubs, and these 6 volumes move with every stage. The child, with every, whenever he gets or she gets older, the message gets stronger, I think. They all disseminate a Medina Salafi form of Islam caught in a battle for the survivor of this religion. The teacher in all of these series is told which messages to emphasize. I'll give you 2 examples. Example 1, children are led to hate specific figures in Islamic history and direct that hatred toward a general category of unbelievers. So for example, in part 1 of this series, children are told the story of Abu Lahab. He was really a hated figure in Islamic history. He's the uncle of the Prophet of Islam and is condemned in Quran as the enemy of Islam. Good? The instruction in the curriculum tell the tutor to emphasize, I hate Abu Lahab because he was kafir, unbeliever, did not believe in God or Allah and the messenger Muhammad, and he used to torture Muslims. then you have three messages that has to be re-emphasized. God will put the unbeliever in fire of hell. The Muslim hates the kuffar, the unbeliever, and loves the Muslims. The kuffar, the unbelievers, hate Islam and hurt Muslims. Okay? A second example, when it comes to jihad, part 1 of this book taught to children in the first grade includes other detailed lessons from Quran, verses, and series of the life of Muhammad. And the most important thing is they show them that you have to love jihad, you have to love dying for God, and they will repeat certain stories, like the story of Abu Lahab, who was considered a person who hurt and cursed Muhammad, and at the same time introduce, should I go?
Yeah, from here.
Like this?
Yeah.
Good. Notice with the story of Abu Lahab, he was considered an enemy of Islam, insulted the Prophet. The story goes about how two children went and killed him, you know, and it's told in a way that makes killing him at the hands of the two Muslim children, to use the words of the curriculum, only natural and just. And when it comes to Jews, they are also constant targets for hatred in the curriculum of the Muslim brothers. And I'm just quoting from them. Jews are the enemies of God. The Muslim knows that the Jews are characterized by all evil, for they are cowards, traitors, and cannot be trusted. It's being taught to children in a manner using the religious history of Islam, a certain specific violent chapter of Islamic history, but in a way to implement these messages to children. It's like to actually ingrain it in them and take them away from their context and put them in that context, and you have to behave in a manner that will be one way or another useful to the cause as they are preaching it. In Western democracy, their organizations and movements claim to be the sole group speaking for Muslims in the West. They insist that Muslims be treated as a homogeneous group. They assert that human rights is a Western imposition, and they present their own Islamist demands as those of all Muslims. And if I give you, I'll give you one example just for you to understand how some of our policymakers seems to be naive in the way they would work with the loudest in our communities. So you will see, for instance, in Britain, until 2005, British governments were basically working with one organization, Muslim organization, the Muslim Councils of Muslims, okay? Of Britain, sorry. When 2005 terrorist attacks took place, they realized the position of that council were not exactly helpful. So they did a survey within the Muslim communities. Only 6% said these people represent us. 6%. And we have a tendency to take the loudest as those speaking in our name. Again, this type of Islamism provides the main ideological framework and worldviews of violent Islamism, and this is the type of Islamism we must pay attention to. I hope by now you have realized that I'm not interested in a polemic discourse. I'm interested in finding solutions for a problem that concerns us all and we have ignored for far too long. We need to name it, define its roots, so we can understand the phenomena we are dealing with. Otherwise, we will continue to move in circles and allow this extremism to take hold of our youth, change our society, and undermine its hard-won universal rights, norms, and values. Don't ignore the pink elephant in the room. It won't disappear if you just ignore it. Just as you condemn your country's fascist or racist far-right groups, I suggest that you extend the same courtesy to our Muslim religious far-right group. Fight them as you fight your own fundamentalists, fascist and racist groups. Be consistent. Break the silence, because it's time to stand firm in our humanity. Thank you.
We're going to take a 10 to 15 minute break, maximum 15, because this is too exciting to take a longer break. Please be back here in your seats, and we'll continue. Thank you.